What are some of the ways that you can teach online or collaborate online? This has recently become an issue with a lot of things shifting online or shifting remotely. I've personally had to deal with this in the form of teaching online, where I've had to shift a number of lectures into online collaboration. So what I'm going to look at the moment is how you might use one of those tools to engage online and to shift teaching and lectures into an online or a remote environment. And in particular, I'm going to focus on Collaborate, which is a function that's through Moodle, otherwise known as Blackboard. And I'm going to look at some of the key features of Collaborate, how you would put a lecture onto Collaborate, how you'd share files or share screen on Collaborate, and the types of ways you can get students to engage with a lecture to ensure that it's as close to an in-person environment as possible, and to ensure that the learning environment is as good as possible for both the teacher and for the students. Alright, so with that in mind, let's jump onto my computer and we'll go through some of the features of Collaborate. So let's try to create a Collaborate session and see the various settings that exist. So to do this, you'd need to open up Moodle or Blackboard. Then after that, you would click Add Activity or Resource. This will then bring up a dialog box where you can add various different things. So here you'll have a Collaborate Ultra button. Click on it and then click Add. It will then ask you for various settings, so an activity name. Let's just call it Test for the moment, but it doesn't really matter. You'd call this whatever your lecture name is going to be. Then there are various settings here that we don't really need to play with at the moment because the Collaborate settings are going to appear on another screen later on. So I'll click Save and return to course. This is then going to bring us back up to the Collaborate screen and we'll click Test. Now when we open this up, what you'll see here is we'll start loading various sessions. Now at the moment I don't have any sessions loaded because I haven't created any yet. So to do this we click Create Session. This is then going to ask us for various session details. Now we need to enter a session name. So I'll just put Test Session, but again it doesn't really matter. I'll ask for further down a start date and an end date, or a start time and an end time. Now I'm going to leave these alone for the moment because we're just going to jump into it. But if you wanted your session to start at some future date or time, you can adjust these at both the time and the date. So you can set up various sessions in advance if you'd like to do so. You can then enable people to enter the session early. This might be just so they can get prepared or whatever the case might be. Under Session Settings, we have various other settings here. Now the default attendee role can either be participant, presenter, or moderator. If you don't want your students to really be uploading anything, i.e. you just want to take full control of the session, you'd leave this as participant. You can allow recordings and downloads of the recordings. Now by default this is off. If you click it, students can then download the recordings. Now generally you won't want to do this unless you want your students to be able to save it to their device. So I'm going to leave this off for the moment, but you're able to adjust it later on. You can further anonymize chat messages. Again, this is really going to be personal preference. Often you won't want to tick this because you might want to be able to address your students by name, so you generally won't want to anonymize chat messages. Also, participants can share audio or video. Now this again is going to be personal preference here as to whether you want to enable your students to be able to share their video or not. Often it's better if they don't share their video, but maybe if they have the option to do so when asking questions or something along those lines. It can be distracting if everyone shares their video in a session. Similarly with audio, you won't want everyone talking over one another. This is really going to come down to lecture control. So if you find your students are generally just talking out of sync, then you might want to disenable this. But if your students are relatively considerate, then they'll probably use this respectfully. Alright, so there are various other portions down here which generally aren't options that you're going to really need to touch that much. So we then click Save, and this is going to give us a session we can click to enter. So I'll click on it, and then I can click Join Session. And this is then going to join me into the Moodle session. So what we'll see in our home screen here is there are several buttons that arise and exist that we'll need to deal with. So let's sort of focus on these from left to right. On the left, in the top left-hand corner, we have an open session dialog, or an open session settings button rather. Now here you can click several buttons. The most relevant ones for us are Start Recording at the top and Leave Session down the bottom. There are various other miscellaneous things here which we generally aren't going to need that much. Alright, so in terms of Start Recording, you need to click the recording for the session to actually be recorded. If you don't click Start Recording, then the session won't be recorded and students won't be able to look at it later. You can click stop recording if you want to stop it for whatever reason, for example if there's a break. And you can click start it again to restart it. Now down the bottom there's a leave session button. Now if you leave the session, it doesn't mean it's ended necessarily, it just means that you have left. Students can remain in this session if they want to do so. Now in the middle of the screen you'll notice a couple of things. In the center there's just a blank screen at the moment. You need to change this blank screen later on, for example by uploading files. This first button is to enable you to change your profile picture in various settings. We generally won't need to touch that very much, so I'm just going to leave that alone. If you want, you can play with that to change your profile picture. This second button is to share audio. Now clearly you can do that if you want your students to be able to hear you. I'm recording screen at the moment, so I don't need to click that for my audio to be audible. In this video button, you can use that to share video from a webcam if you want to do so. Sometimes that's going to be useful for a lecture, sometimes it will be distracting. If too many people share video at once, sometimes the system can slow down. Then we have a raise hand button. When you raise your hand, it's basically signaling to someone that you want to ask a question. Now, as the lecturer, you generally won't need to do this, because generally you're not going to need to raise your hand to ask a question. Often this is more relevant to students than it will be for you, and the students will be able to raise their hand and you can see that on the screens. Now on the right hand side in the bottom right hand corner, there's this Open Collaborate panel. You click that in the purple button. It will then bring up various options. Now in the first one here, we have a chat dialog. Students can type in messages, you can type in messages, it can basically be a chat here. Now typically students will ask questions during the lecture using this dialog button. You can then answer them via chat or you can answer them orally. Either way, you're going to be able to answer the students. You might want to monitor this periodically rather than just letting it interrupt the flow of the lecture. This second button just lists the attendees. At the moment there is only myself, so there's only one attendee at the moment. This third button has Share Content. Under the Share Content button, you're able to share various things. Here we have various different options we can use. We have firstly this Share Blank Whiteboard option, which basically enables you to create a whiteboard here, which you can then draw on or write on. So this then leads to the various other buttons we have at the top, which open up once you've shared this blank whiteboard. Now you've got this first button, which is just to select or point at things. This next one, which is again a pointer using the hand, it generally lags the mouse a bit. Then we have this next one, which is a pencil button. As you can see, I'm just drawing with the mouse at the moment, or if you have a touch screen, you're able to draw using a pen, for example. And you're able to do this maybe with a bit of a lag. Then next we have a shape button. This enables you to have a few options here. So you can have a rectangle, for example. You can draw an ellipse or a circle. As one example here, is generally going to be a little bit fiddly to do, however. And then of course you can draw lines, which sometimes are useful for tracing things out. So that's basically what you can do in this shapes button. In the text button, you're able to type various things. So you can type this on the whiteboard. Now, it does show up with a little bit of a lag, and what you can see in this screen recording is I've typed into this box, but you're going to need to click enter for it to be visible to students. The next button we have is clear. Now, the clear button unfortunately erases the whole thing. It doesn't enable you to erase portions of it, so there's not an option to erase just a portion of what you've written. Clear is going to erase everything. We can next go to the next option, which is share applications or screens. Now, you can either share a screen here, as you can kind of see from these buttons, or you can share an application window, or you're going to be able to share a tab from, say, an internet browser. So you're going to be able to share whichever one of these you'd like to do so. And you can go to share application, and there are various different options down here that you can share. So for example, I can share an Excel screen at the moment. So I'll just click to do so currently. Now what you can see here is I've got a share screen of an Excel spreadsheet with various different numbers on it. If I want to stop sharing the screen, I click stop sharing. Now notably, in our collaborate function here, what you'll notice is that you won't be able to get students to edit the Excel spreadsheet. Rather, what you're going to have is you're going to just enable students to be able to look at this Excel spreadsheet rather than actually edit it. So we had the share application screen. And then what you also have is share files. Now, share files enables you to basically just drag or drop files in here for them to be shared. So, for example, I've got a sample sample PowerPoint slide rather. So I'm getting the PowerPoint slides to share. These are effectively going to be converted into pictures or images. So sometimes Collaborate can mess up the formatting. So just bear that in mind. It typically does a slightly better job with PDF files. Now, once you've uploaded it, you have to click Share Now for anyone to be able to potentially edit it. Then what you need to do is double click it, and this is where students can see what's happening. Now, I've got sample slides here, and you can see here that I have two slides, a title slide and of course the next slide. And much like with our whiteboard options, we're also able to draw onto this. So we can draw whatever we want to do so on this next slide. Now, notably again, it's a little bit laggy and the fidelity is not super high, but you're able to draw in these PowerPoint slides as well, which can sometimes be useful for pointing things out. So that's what we have in terms of sharing these files. Now, you'll notice some various other options down here. You've got polling options where you can ask students questions here, either multiple choice or yes or no options. This can sometimes be a little bit fiddly because clearly it can take a little bit of time to type these in. So it's probably going to be better to do this during a break when you have time to be able to type these in and give students an opportunity to respond. Similarly with yes or no answers. And then finally you have breakout groups where you can split people into groups. So those are our main options under the share content. Now, on the left-hand side again, whenever you open up one of these things, either a PowerPoint slide or a blank whiteboard slide, you'll see where I'm hovering the mouse, there's this option with a magnifier glass, where you can zoom in, zoom out, or whatever the case might be. Now, notably here, this just zooms it in or zooms it out for your screen. Students would need to do it individually for themselves if they were wanting to zoom in or zoom out. So if you want students to be able to see it with magnification, you should instruct them to click the plus or the minus sign, as the case might be, rather than assuming that when you click the plus button, students will automatically zoom in or zoom out. So just bear that one in mind. So those are the main features of Collaborate here. Now, it can be reasonably flexible for enabling you to try to share content with students, but it has some limitations. The main limitation is it's mainly for content dumps. It's quite difficult to have students interacting in a verbal sense. They can interact using a chat session here, but it's very difficult for it to be purely collaborative and Socrative like it might be in an actual online classroom. Nevertheless, students can be quite interactive, especially for relatively more shy students who often don't raise their hands in class, but might be more willing to chat in a chat session. So that's basically how you might teach online using Collaborate. It's a relatively simple system to get up and running. It's relatively easy to use. Now, in terms of whether it compares well to an in-person lecture, that's a case-by-case issue. I generally find it isn't quite as good as an in-person lecture because it's not quite as interactive. But in the current situation, it might be an alternative that enables you to continue classes without too much disruption. So I hope this video has given you a bit of an introduction to the Collaborate system, a bit of an introduction to how you can use it, and I hope the video has been useful to you. If it has, it would be great if you click the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you next time.